when JobKeeper will be slashed by $100 for some and $200 for others. There are millions of Australians who continue to do it tough. And at the very time that restrictions are going up and therefore economic activity going down, the government support goes down today. This is a premature withdrawal of support, just as the cutting of job seeker payments to those who are unemployed was premature when it occurred 3 days ago. The government can't have it both ways. They want to say that the economy is doing it incredibly well, but at the same time they say that we can make these cuts when restrictions are coming in. Can I also say that it's consistent with this government's approach to looking after workers in general. In the last week of Parliament, we saw legislation introduced that would cut wages of those essential workers who've done so much to see us through this pandemic. Those people who worked on January 1, on December 25, on December 26. If this government gets its way, it will have legislation in place that will allow for the cuts of penalty rates and other leave loadings that are available as compensation for people working on public holidays. These wage cuts would have a devastating impact on working families who are already doing it tough. But today's cuts to JobKeeper are premature, will hurt workers, will hurt businesses, but will also hurt our economy, because the withdrawal of support at the time when we're still very much dealing with the economic impact of this crisis is premature. Tony?
Thanks, Anthony. People are worried at the moment and they want security. Instead, the government's giving them cuts. Cuts to JobKeeper, cuts to job seeker, and cuts to wages. We've just had 3 public holidays. We've got another one later in the month. Every penalty rate for those workers is up for grabs and can be gone under the legislation that the government's got before the Parliament right now. At the exact time that people are already so worried about the safety of their health, they shouldn't also be worried about whether or not they can pay their bills. But that's exactly the position that Scott Morrison's putting them in.
Happy to take questions.
The Prime Minister says his vaccine strategy puts Australia at the front of the queue. Do you believe that to be the case?
Well, quite clearly, we're not at the front of the queue. The fact is that it makes no sense for the TGA to have recommended, as it is likely to do, in January, the approval of the Pfizer vaccine, but then for the rollout to not occur until March. What we know is that Australia is not at the front of the queue. We've never been at the front of the queue, and that's why Labor argued very early on that we needed to get these deals signed, that we needed to get 6 deals signed, which is international best practice. And the fact is that other nations got to the front of the queue way back in March of last year, and Australia isn't at that point yet. Can I make this position clear as well with regard to the government's misinformation campaign? Labor supports the independence of the TGA. No one is calling for a shortcutting of that process. What we are saying, though, is that if you have confidence in the TGA processes, once it's approved, it should be rolled out.
Mr Albanese, on the industrial relations changes, part of the government's justification for allowing companies to go below the boot is that they might be in financial distress. Does the additional wave or the additional cases that we're seeing make the government's case for it?
No, it makes the opposite. What the government is putting forward is in the legislation. You've got to look at the legislation, what it actually says, because that's the law that they want to put into place. And the law that they want is that any business impacted by the coronavirus pandemic can implement these changes. Well, the fact is that every business in Australia has been impacted. Every Australian has been impacted. Every family, every worker, every business. So it would be across the board. These cuts could be allowed to happen, and that's consistent with a government that's presided over stagnant wages ever since it came to office.
The former prosecutor of Nazi war crimes, Graham Blewett, fears Australian police don't have the appropriate expertise to pursue Afghanistan allegations and wants Army's chain of command re-examined. Does Labor agree?
Well, Justice Brereton put forward in his recommendations a clear argument for police prosecutions to occur. We support the recommendations arising from the Brereton report, and we also say that we're certain that if any further resources are required, they should be requested and they should be granted, and I'm confident that the government would do that.
What's the level that you'd like to see JobKeeper and JobSeeker remain at, and for how long?
Well, I'd like to see JobKeeper stay where it is prior to today, for these cuts not to happen. And I wanted to see JobSeeker stay where it was before January 1 as well. There needs to be a withdrawal at some time in the future of additional payments in terms of JobKeeper support, and JobSeeker we never argued should be maintained at double the old New Start rate. However, JobSeeker should be increased permanently, and the government should announce that. And we're not going to let the government off the hook between now and the next election by naming a figure.
You want it to remain at the level it was at 4 days ago?
Well, right now we oppose the cuts that occurred on January 1. I held a press conference on that day, and I'm holding a press conference today saying that the JobKeeper payments should not be reduced, that these reductions are unwise, they will hurt individuals, they'll hurt families, but importantly as well, they'll hurt businesses by reducing economic activity at a time when we know there's still a major handbrake on the economy.
How should the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party respond to the revelations about Gladys Liu, Michael Sukkar and Haha Liu?
Well, by taking them seriously, which is what they haven't done up to now. Michael Sukkar is a rolling problem for the government. The only time he gets a run is in various forms of scandal due to his priority, which seems to be branch stacking and fundraising in the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party. Scott Morrison's done nothing about it, absolutely nothing, and he remains as the Assistant Treasurer. And these allegations should be investigated properly. But if Scott Morrison remains true to form, it's a free-for-all for people in the Liberal and the National Party. There's been no action taken, and I suggest that that stands in stark contrast to the action which Labor took, myself as the federal Labor leader and Daniel Andrews as the Premier of Victoria, on intervening into the Victorian branch to weed out problems that have been identified and exposed there.